here in San Antonio and at KENS 5.
In February, actually, her husband, Air Force Major Andreen McDonald, was convicted of manslaughter. Now CBS's 48 Hours is diving deeper into that investigation of what exactly happened to Andreen.
Peter Van Zandt has a preview of this weekend's episode.
29-year-old Andreen McDonald, a businesswoman, wife and mother who had turned her assisted living healthcare business into $1 million enterprise, had seemingly vanished from her home.
Her purse was still there, her keys were on the counter, and her vehicles were still there.
Investigator Frank Stubbs saw something startling in the bathroom.
There was blood on the wall. There was blood and hair on a light switch.
Andreen's husband of 10 years, Air Force Major Andreen McDonald, told investigators the last time he had seen his wife was the night before. But the next day, investigators discovered items inside Andreen's car that were not there during their initial search, including a shovel and, in a trash can, some clothing that appeared to be Andre's.
We found blood on the pocket of the jeans.
Although investigators had suspicions about Andre, without a body, none of the evidence collected proved that a murder had occurred. Law enforcement, along with volunteer search teams, came out to search for Andreen. Their search ended when a local farmer made a shocking discovery.
I saw what appeared to be a human skull.
That must have been a shock.
A shock, yes.
McDonald was arrested and charged with his wife's murder, but he would plead not guilty, raising an unusual defense.
So you can watch the full episode of 48 Hours tomorrow night right here on KENS 5. Later this morning, by the way, I'm going to be speaking.
The Texas sun hung heavy over the barren field, its light shimmering against the silver blades of dry grass. It was July 11, 2019, 4 months after Andreen McDonald had vanished without a trace. For weeks, search parties had combed the back roads and ravines outside San Antonio, scanning for anything, a scrap of clothing, a sign of life, or the worst possibility of all. Then, on that searing summer afternoon, a rancher walking his property caught sight of something unnatural. A faint glint beneath the grass, where the earth had been disturbed. He took a few cautious steps closer. The air was still, heavy. A sickly sweet smell began to rise as he knelt. There, half buried in the soil and brush, he saw the shape of a human skull. Nearby, torn remnants of clothing. A piece of jewelry, dulled by weather but unmistakably elegant. And scattered bones, fragile, whitened by months of sun. When deputies arrived, the scene was eerily quiet. No signs of wildlife. No footprints leading in or out. Only the whisper of wind across the open field and the sound of camera shutters clicking in grim succession. It didn't take long for them to know who she was. They had been looking for her for 132 days. Andreen Nicole McDonald, mother, businesswoman, beloved friend, had finally been found. But the story of how she ended up in that lonely field was far more chilling than anyone could have imagined. In life, she was radiant, ambitious, compassionate, driven by the kind of energy that could light up an entire room. She had built her own business from the ground up, cared for her family, and fought for every bit of success she earned. In death, her body told a story of violence. Bones fractured. Jaw split. Her spine broken. The brutality spoke of rage, intimate, deliberate rage. And as investigators stood in that field, one question echoed through the dry Texas air. Who could do this to Andreen McDonald? They already knew the name. They'd known it since the day she disappeared. Major Andreen McDonald, her husband. Long before her name filled headlines, Andreen Nicole McDonald was known simply as the woman who made things happen. Born in Port Antonio, Jamaica, she grew up in a small coastal town framed by the sea and thick green hills. From an early age, she carried herself with quiet determination, a sharp contrast to her soft voice and disarming smile. Her family described her as focused. Teachers remembered a girl who didn't just dream big, she mapped her way there. When others talked about what they wanted to become, Andreen was already taking the first steps to make it happen. By her early 20s, she had earned a degree in business studies from Excelsior Community College in Kingston. But she wasn't content to stop there. Her ambition pulled her far from home, across the ocean, to Texas, where she would build not just a career, but an empire of her own. In San Antonio, Andreen's intelligence found its purpose. She studied finance at the University of Texas at San Antonio, graduating magna cum laude. It was there she began to shape the foundation of what would become Starlight Homes, an assisted living company that would eventually provide care for dozens of elderly clients. Those who worked for her said she was relentless but kind. She pushed people to do their best because she expected the same from herself. Her business wasn't just a means to an end, it was personal. She saw it as a way to give dignity to those who often lost it in old age. To her clients and employees, Andreen wasn't just a boss. She was a force. But beneath that determined glow was a woman with the same hopes and insecurities as anyone else. She longed for a stable home, a family, and a husband who would stand beside her as an equal. That man appeared in the form of Andreen McDonald, a U.S. Air Force major, polished, disciplined, and ambitious in his own right. He was tall, reserved, and calculated, the kind of man who seemed to have control over every detail of his life. To outsiders, they looked like a power couple, two successful Jamaican immigrants building a legacy together in America. They married, settled in a quiet suburb outside San Antonio, and soon welcomed a daughter. Their child was the center of their world, bright, gentle, and diagnosed with autism, mostly nonverbal. Andreen adored her. Every photo showed her eyes lit with a tenderness rarely captured in words. Neighbors saw a woman always on the move, managing a business, caring for her daughter, organizing family outings, and still finding time to volunteer. But those closest to her saw something else, a woman under strain. The marriage, once full of shared ambition, had begun to crack. Friends noticed how Andreen's vibrant smile didn't always reach her eyes anymore. André, they said, had grown distant, sometimes cold. His military precision seemed to extend into their marriage, where he preferred control and silence to conversation and compromise. Andreen confided in a few close friends that her husband was controlling, jealous, and increasingly unpredictable. She once said she feared he might hurt her if she ever tried to leave. Still, she stayed. For her daughter. For the dream she had fought too hard to build. For the belief that maybe, somehow, things could still get better. By 2019, Andreen McDonald appeared to have everything: a thriving business, a beautiful home, a loving child, and financial stability. But what the world couldn't see was that behind closed doors, her marriage had turned into a quiet battleground. And in that home, behind manicured lawns and white walls, the tension between love and resentment was growing darker by the day. Soon, the woman who had built a life from nothing would find herself trapped in a storm she couldn't escape. And it would all come to a violent end one ordinary night in early March. The cracks in Andreen McDonald's perfect life didn't appear all at once. They began as whispers, the kind of subtle, invisible fractures that only the closest people notice. Friends recalled the first red flags as small things. Andreen would cancel plans suddenly, claiming she was just tired. She stopped posting cheerful updates on social media, even though her business continued to thrive. Her laughter, once effortless, had become measured, careful. Behind the gates of their suburban home, the tension between Andreen and André was growing impossible to ignore. Those who visited could feel it in the air, an energy that made the walls seem tighter, the silences longer. André, colleagues said, was a man of precision. Everything had its place, its purpose, its rule. But at home, that order felt suffocating. He watched Andreen closely, her phone, her spending, her business dealings. If she came home late, there were questions. If she didn't answer fast enough, there were arguments. To outsiders, it might have looked like a marriage of two strong personalities clashing. But to those who knew her best, it felt darker, like control wrapped in the disguise of concern. One of Andreen's closest friends later told investigators that Andreen had become fearful. She had begun speaking in code when discussing personal matters. If she wanted to talk freely, she'd step outside, away from her husband's line of sight. There were rumors of physical altercations, arguments that escalated, doors slammed, things thrown. But Andreen rarely talked about it openly. When she did, she brushed it off. "He's just stressed," she'd say. "It's just the military life." Still, something in her tone told another story. In private, she told friends she was considering leaving him, that she couldn't live under constant tension. She even mentioned that she'd spoken to an attorney, just to understand her options. But divorce wasn't a simple choice. They shared not only a home and a child, but also a business empire tied up in both their names. Andreen had worked too hard to build it all, and Andre knew it. Their arguments became louder, more explosive. Neighbors recalled hearing shouting from inside the house late at night, voices muffled by walls, but unmistakably angry. Andreen tried to keep her world from collapsing. She threw herself into work, into her daughter's care, into maintaining appearances. But privately, she began documenting things, receipts, messages, small pieces of evidence she tucked away in case she ever needed to protect herself. There was one chilling clue that would later send shivers through investigators. Andreen had told a friend that if she ever went missing, Andre would be the one to blame. It was a confession delivered half in jest, half in fear, but it would prove prophetic. In early 2019, that fear began to surface more plainly. She became distant, wary. Her once vibrant energy dimmed. Andre's behavior, on the other hand, grew increasingly erratic. He accused her of infidelity, a claim no one could substantiate. He'd show up unannounced at her business, watching her interactions with clients and employees. One friend described seeing him glare at Andreen from across the room at a social event, not with anger, but with something colder. Calculation. Andreen's friends started checking in on her regularly. She'd often respond with a short message, "I'm fine," followed by silence. It was as if she knew something was coming, but couldn't stop it. And then, one night, her messages stopped altogether. It was February 28, 2019. Andreen didn't show up to work the next morning. She didn't answer her phone. She didn't pick up her daughter from daycare. At first, people assumed she was busy. But by nightfall, concern turned to dread. Her friends drove to her house, hoping for a misunderstanding, a phone left at home, a meeting forgotten. But what they found inside that house would send them running for help. On the floor, traces of blood. Hair stuck to a light switch. And an eerie silence that felt unnatural. Something terrible had happened inside that home. And the man who should have been most desperate to find her, her husband, was calm. Detached. In that moment, the red flags that had fluttered quietly for months were no longer warnings. They were evidence. And they pointed to a truth no one wanted to believe. The night of February 28, 2019, settled over San Antonio like any other, quiet, ordinary, unremarkable. Inside the McDonald home, the lights burned late. Behind those walls, the calm exterior of suburban life was unraveling for the last time. Andreen McDonald had spent the day running her business, returning home to her daughter, following a routine she knew by heart. But beneath the rhythm of her daily life, something had shifted. Her marriage had been splintering for months, and the weight of it pressed down like a storm that refused to break. What exactly happened inside that house remains partly shrouded in silence, but what investigators would later piece together told a story of rage, fear, and a tragic inevitability. At some point during the night, an argument began, words traded in low, sharp tones, then rising. Andreen and Andre had fought before, but this time it didn't stop. Neighbors would later tell detectives they heard shouting echoing from the McDonald home. One recalled the sound of something heavy falling. Then, silence. What occurred next is known only through the evidence that remained. Forensic investigators later found traces of blood in multiple places throughout the house, on the floor, on a bathroom light switch, faint smears on the walls. The struggle had been violent. Andreen's injuries, revealed months later through forensic examination of her remains, spoke of blunt force trauma, fractures to her spine, her ribs, her jaw. It was not a quick death. It was personal, brutal, deliberate. And somewhere in that same home, a small child may have witnessed the horror unfold. Their 6-year-old daughter, autistic and mostly nonverbal, was later observed reenacting scenes of violence, pointing to places where her mother once stood. She was too young to explain in words what she'd seen, but her actions told their own kind of truth. After Andreen's body fell still, Andreen McDonald did not call for help. He did not rush to the hospital, did not dial 911, did not alert a friend or neighbor. Instead, what he did next painted the portrait of a man who had crossed the line between panic and calculation. In the early morning hours, Andreen drove to a Lowe's hardware store. Surveillance footage showed him buying items that, on their own, might seem innocent: a shovel, an axe, a hatchet, large plastic trash bags, gloves, gasoline, and heavy-duty paper towels. But in the shadow of what had happened, those items were far from innocent. They were the tools of disposal. When police later found the receipt for these items, it had been torn into small pieces, thrown in the trash, as if shredding it could erase what had been done. Andreen then began the process of erasing his wife's existence. He gathered her belongings, her phone, her keys, her purse, and removed them from sight. He burned what he could in a small pit behind their house. Neighbors would later recall seeing faint smoke rising from the backyard that morning, though none thought much of it at the time. He left his daughter in the house, confused, alone, silent. And he drove. Where exactly he went that night remained unclear until months later, when the truth emerged in the tall grass of a rural field 6 miles away. There, hidden beneath brush and dirt, lay the remains of the woman he once vowed to love and protect. By the time the sun rose on March 1st, Andreen McDonald, businesswoman, mother, friend, was gone. Her phone went silent. Her car sat untouched. And the man who should have been searching for her instead spent the morning crafting an alibi. He told friends he hadn't seen her. That maybe she needed space. That she'd gone for a drive. But Andreen McDonald didn't just vanish. She was silenced. And the darkness that had long lingered in that home had finally consumed it. When Andreen McDonald failed to show up for work on the morning of March 1, 2019, her employees knew immediately that something was wrong. She wasn't the kind of woman who vanished without explanation. She ran her business with military precision: appointments, routines, deadlines. If she missed something, there was always a reason. That morning, her phone went straight to voicemail. Her car sat in the driveway. Her purse and ID were still at home. By evening, the dread had settled in like fog. The place that once held silence and death has been transformed, not by the crime, but by those who still visit, who still remember, who still speak her name in the wind. Because remembrance, too, is a kind of justice. There is a moment that comes at the end of every true crime story, when the facts have been told, the verdict has been read, and the cameras have long since turned away. But in that quiet aftermath, one question always remains. What was all of this for? For Andreen McDonald, life was never meant to end in a field of silence. She was supposed to grow old watching her daughter thrive. She was supposed to keep building, keep dreaming, keep proving that you can rise from humble beginnings and carve out something extraordinary. But one night of violence took all of that away. One moment of rage turned a home into a crime scene, a family into fragments, a legacy into evidence. And when the world looked for answers, it found a reflection of something much larger, a truth that hides in plain sight. That danger doesn't always come from strangers in the dark. Sometimes, it sleeps beside you. The story of Andreen McDonald isn't just about a murder. It's about control disguised as love. About warning signs ignored because we don't want to believe the people closest to us are capable of such cruelty. It's about the silent suffering that so many endure behind closed doors, the unspoken fears, the whispered excuses, the nights spent hoping things will change. Andreen's life reminds us that strength doesn't make you immune to violence. That intelligence, success, and independence don't always shield you from danger. She did everything right, she worked hard, built a business, cared for her family, and still, the person she trusted most became the reason she never came home. In the end, justice came in fragments. A conviction that didn't fit the crime. A civil judgment that could never be paid. And a sentence that no number could balance. Because no punishment can resurrect what's gone. But perhaps Andreen's true legacy isn't in the verdict or the lawsuit, but in the voices she left behind, the ones that refused to let her story be forgotten. Her mother's courage. Her friends' determination. Her community's vow to speak out, to protect, to remember. Somewhere tonight, a woman is sitting in her home, feeling the first flicker of fear that something isn't right, that love has turned into control. Maybe she's watching this story. Maybe she's hearing Andreen's name for the first time. And maybe, just maybe, that will be enough to make her reach out for help. Enough to make her choose life before it's too late. Because if there's one thing Andreen McDonald's story teaches us, it's this. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes, it smiles. And in the end, all that's left behind are the echoes, of laughter that once filled a home, of footsteps that will never return, of dreams that end mid-sentence. The field where her body was found is quiet now, reclaimed by wind and grass. But if you listen closely, it still speaks. It whispers her name, a reminder, a warning, and a promise that her story will not fade into the dark. Andreen McDonald lived with purpose. She died with courage. And through the telling of her story, she lives again, not as a victim, but as a voice. So tonight, as you turn off the lights and the screen fades to black, remember her. Remember the woman who built her own light in a world that tried to extinguish it. And ask yourself, how well do you really know the people you trust the most? If this story moved you, share it. Let Andreen's name echo beyond this moment. Like this video, subscribe to Dark Matters True Crime, and turn on notifications, because the truth hides in the shadows, and together, we bring it to light.